Hello, and welcome back to another journey through the dusty corridors of history. If you're settling in for the night, finding a comfortable position, perhaps adjusting your pillow one last time, you're in exactly the right place. Tonight, we're traveling back several thousand years to ancient Egypt, but not the Egypt of golden treasures and mysterious pyramids you might expect. Instead, we're exploring something far more intimate. What it actually felt like to live your entire existence under the watchful eyes of dozens of gods, where every sunrise was a divine victory, every harvest a negotiation with the cosmos, and every moment of your life was wrapped in ritual, obligation, and the constant awareness of the afterlife waiting beyond. Before we begin, if you enjoy these gentle explorations of history's quieter corners, please consider subscribing to the channel. Leave a comment about which historical period you'd like us to explore next. And a like always helps more people discover these restful journeys through time. But no pressure. Your comfort is what matters most right now. So, let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts begin to drift like incense smoke through a temple courtyard, and imagine yourself stepping back into a world where the sacred and the mundane were impossibly, inextricably intertwined. Let's begin. The first sensation that greets you even before you fully wake is the distant sound of a temple gong echoing across the darkness. It's still night, true night. But already, somewhere in the complex of buildings that serves as the dwelling place of the gods, priests are stirring. You, however, have a few more moments. The gods will forgive your delay. They are, after all, being attended to by those whose sole purpose is divine service. You open your eyes to a darkness that isn't quite complete. Through the narrow window opening of your mud brick home, a faint, gray light suggests dawn's approach. This moment, this threshold between night and day, is sacred. Ra, the sun god, is currently engaged in his nightly battle with Apophis, the serpent of chaos, traveling through the underworld. Soon, if all goes according to the cosmic order, he will emerge victorious once more, and daylight will return. It happens every morning, and yet you cannot take it for granted. Nothing in your world simply happens. Everything is the result of divine will, cosmic balance, or the performance of proper rituals. You rise from your sleeping mat, your body already adjusting to the day's first obligation. Before anything else, before food, before attending to children, before beginning the work that will consume your daylight hours, you must perform your morning purification. You move to the small clay basin near the entrance of your home, where water was drawn the evening before from the Nile. The water is tepid, slightly silty, carrying that distinctive river smell you've known your entire life. You pour it over your hands, then your face, speaking the words your parents taught you, just as their parents taught them. The prayer is simple, addressed to Hapi, god of the Nile's inundation, and to Ra, asking for his protection in the coming day. The words have been repeated so many times they've worn smooth in your mouth like stones in a riverbed. You speak them without thinking, which is perhaps the point. These prayers aren't meant to be intellectual exercises. They're meant to be as natural as breathing. And now, the sun begins its appearance. You step outside your dwelling, as do your neighbors, and together, without any spoken coordination because none is needed, you turn toward the east. The horizon is softening from black to deep blue, then to purple, then to that particular shade of orange-pink that announces Ra's imminent victory. When the first sliver of brilliant gold appears, You raise your hands in a gesture of reverence. Some of your neighbors have brought small offerings, a piece of bread, a cup of beer, which they place on the small household shrines that stand outside nearly every door. Your own shrine is modest, a small carved image of Bes, the dwarf god who protects households and children, and a tiny figure of Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess who guards women in childbirth. Your wife insisted on both, especially after the difficult birth of your second child 3 years ago. The bread you place before them is from yesterday's baking, already slightly hard, but it's what you can spare. The gods, you've been taught, appreciate the intention more than the luxury of the offering. This morning ritual consumes perhaps 20 minutes, but those 20 minutes are non-negotiable. To skip them would be to invite chaos, illness, misfortune. Not in a metaphorical sense. You truly believe that the maintenance of cosmic order, what the Egyptians call ma'at, depends on these daily observances being performed by thousands upon thousands of people, each fulfilling their small role in keeping the universe functioning. Now, with the sun climbing higher and the morning rituals complete, you can attend to breakfast. The meal is simple: bread, onions, and, if your family is fortunate, a few dates. Your wife has already begun heating the previous day's bread over the small fire that smolders constantly in the corner of your main room. The smell mingles with the ever-present scent of the Nile mud that forms the walls of your home, the dried fish hanging from the ceiling, and the faint sweetness of the dates stored in a clay jar. You eat sitting on a low stool, and as you eat, you're already thinking about the day ahead. You're a farmer, like the vast majority of Egyptian people have been for thousands of years, and your work is dictated not merely by seasons but by sacred calendars. The year is divided into 3 seasons: Akhet, the inundation when the Nile floods; Pere, the growing season; and Shemu, the harvest. Each season brings its own labor, its own obligations to the gods, and its own anxieties. Currently, it's the middle of Pere. The floodwaters have long since receded, leaving behind the rich black silt that gives Egypt its ancient name, Kemet, the Black Land. Your fields, which you don't technically own, all land belongs to Pharaoh, who is himself a living god, have been planted with emmer wheat and barley. The crops are growing well, but they require constant attention. The irrigation channels must be maintained, the water flow carefully managed, and the fields must be watched constantly for any signs of pest or blight. But before you can go to your fields, there's another obligation. Today is a feast day, one of the countless festival days that punctuate the Egyptian calendar. This particular festival honors Sobek, the crocodile god, whose temple stands near the riverbank about an hour's walk from your village. Attending isn't precisely mandatory for someone of your status. The priests will perform the essential rituals, but it's deeply expected. Your family has farmed these fields for generations, and everyone in your extended family has always attended the Sobek festival. To skip it would invite questions, suspicion, and perhaps the god's displeasure. So you walk, along with dozens of your neighbors, along the dirt path that parallels one of the irrigation canals. The sun is already hot, though it's not yet mid-morning. By afternoon, the heat will be crushing, but for now, it's merely insistent. You pass fields where other farmers are already at work, their movements steady and rhythmic, the eternal dance of agricultural labor that has continued unchanged for thousands of years. As you walk, you pass small shrines and stelae, some ancient, some recently carved. Each marks a place where something significant occurred, a miracle, a divine appearance, an answered prayer. One stone, weathered and barely legible, commemorates a year when the Nile's inundation was particularly generous, saving the region from famine. Another, newer and painted in bright colors that haven't yet faded, thanks the gods for protecting a family from crocodile attack. The crocodiles are, of course, why you're making this journey today. They are both threat and divinity, feared and worshipped. In the marshy areas along the Nile, they're a constant danger, massive, ancient creatures that can take a person in an instant. Yet they're also manifestations of Sobek, powerful and protective when properly honored. This duality, this constant tension between danger and reverence, characterizes so much of Egyptian religious life. You arrive at the temple as the morning rituals are reaching their crescendo. The temple itself is an impressive structure, though not nearly as grand as the great temples at Thebes or Memphis. Its entrance is marked by a small pylon painted with images of Sobek devouring enemies of Egypt. Inside the outer courtyard, where common people like yourself are permitted, incense smoke hangs in the air, thick and slightly overwhelming. The scent is frankincense, imported at enormous expense, and its presence alone communicates the seriousness of this place. Priests move through the courtyard, their white linen garments spotless, their heads shaved completely bald. They carry offerings toward the inner sanctuary, where the god's image resides, a place you will never see with your own eyes. You know it contains a statue of Sobek, possibly even sacred crocodiles kept in pools, but the inner temple is forbidden to all but the highest-ranking priests. The gods, you've been taught, are too powerful, too dangerous to approach directly. Even Pharaoh, who is himself divine, must be carefully purified and prepared before entering the presence of the god's image. You make your own offering at one of the small altars in the outer courtyard. A small fish you caught yesterday, specifically for this purpose. A junior priest accepts it with a barely perceptible nod, adding it to the growing pile of offerings. These will later be redistributed. Some will be consumed by the priests. Some will be sold to fund the temple's operations, and some will be given to the poor. The economy of offerings is complex and carefully managed, but that's not your concern. Your concern is that you've fulfilled your obligation. The ceremony continues. A high priest, distinguished by his leopard skin cloak and elaborate collar of gold and lapis lazuli, emerges briefly to sprinkle water from the temple's sacred pool over the assembled crowd. This water has been in contact with the divine presence. It carries blessing and purification. When a few drops land on your face, you feel a moment of genuine relief. You've done right. The god has been honored, but already you're anxious about the time. The sun is climbing higher, and you have work waiting. The festival will continue for hours. There will be processions, music, perhaps even the ritual feeding of the sacred crocodiles. But you've fulfilled your minimum obligation. You make your way out of the courtyard, offering quick prayers at several small shrines on your way, and begin the walk back to your fields. The afternoon work is exactly what you expected: grueling, hot, and monotonous. You work alongside two of your sons, managing the irrigation channels that feed water to your barley field. The work requires constant attention, but very little thought, which allows your mind to wander. And it wanders, inevitably, to death. This might seem morbid, but it isn't, not really. Death isn't something Egyptians avoid thinking about. Quite the opposite. You've been preparing for your death, in one way or another, since you were old enough to understand the concept. You're not wealthy. You won't have a grand tomb or elaborate funerary equipment, but you've been setting aside what you can. A few small amulets, some plain canopic jars that your wife has been decorating with simple prayers, a modest collection of Shabti figures, small statues that will, according to belief, magically come to life in the afterlife to perform labor on your behalf. The afterlife, as you understand it, is both wonderful and terrifying. If you live correctly, if your heart is found to be lighter than the feather of Mahat when weighed in judgment, you'll proceed to the field of reeds, a place that's essentially a perfected version of Egypt. You'll farm there just as you do now, but the harvests will always be abundant. The Nile will always flood at exactly the right level, and there will be no pain, no disease, no hunger. But if your heart is heavy with wrongdoing, if you've lied, stolen, murdered, or failed in your obligations to the gods, the consequences are horrific. Your heart will be devoured by Ammit, the demon with the head of a crocodile, the body of a leopard, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. You will cease to exist, not just dead but unmade, erased from existence itself. This prospect terrifies you more than any earthly punishment. You've tried to live correctly. You've honored the gods, avoided obvious sins, and performed the required rituals. But you're also aware of the many ways you might have failed unknowingly. Did you once speak a false word? Did you ever take water from the irrigation channel before it was your turn? Did you fail to show sufficient respect to a superior? The list of potential transgressions in the Book of the Dead is long and detailed. Dozens of declarations you must be able to make truthfully. I have not committed murder. I have not stolen. I have not caused pain. I have not made anyone weep. Can you honestly say you've never caused anyone pain, never made anyone weep? The ambiguity haunts you. As the sun begins its descent, you finish your work and make your way home. Your body aches, it always aches, from the endless labor. Your hands are calloused, your back perpetually sore, your skin darkened and weathered from years under the sun. You're 32 years old, which makes you neither young nor old in this world. Many people die younger, some live longer. You hope for a few more productive years, time to see your children established, time to save a bit more for your burial. The evening meal is similar to the morning's. Bread, onions, beer. The beer is thick, slightly sour, nutritious rather than intoxicating. You drink it from a clay cup while your wife tells you about her day, the gossip from the village, concerns about your youngest child's persistent cough, plans for tomorrow. After the meal, there are evening prayers. These are simpler than the morning's elaborate rituals. Just a few words of thanks, a small offering of incense at the household shrine, a prayer for protection through the night, because night, in the Egyptian understanding, is dangerous. It's when Ra must battle Apophis, when evil spirits roam more freely, when the boundary between the living world and the realm of the dead becomes more permeable. You check on your children, all sleeping soundly on their mats, and then you lie down yourself. The house settles into silence, broken only by the distant sounds of the Nile, the occasional bark of a dog, the soft rustle of wind through the papyrus reeds that grow in the marshy areas beyond the fields. Your last conscious thought, as it is most nights, is a prayer. Not an elaborate one, just a simple plea. May I wake tomorrow. May my family be safe. May the gods look favorably upon us. And then, sleep claims you, just as it claims everyone in your village, in your region, in all of Egypt. a land where millions of people drift into unconsciousness each night with the same anxieties, the same hopes, and the same absolute certainty that their lives are held in the hands of powers vast, inscrutable, and demanding. The rhythm continues tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, until eventually you won't wake at all, and your journey to the field of reeds or to oblivion will begin. Let us shift our perspective now from the mud-brick homes of farmers to the gleaming palace complexes of the divine ruler himself, not just any pharaoh, but one who would become known to history as Ramses the Great, a man who ruled for 66 years, who fathered over 100 children, who built monuments on a scale that still astounds us today, and who understood, perhaps better than any other Egyptian ruler, how to wield religion as an instrument of power. But before we explore the man at the height of his power, let us begin with the boy. Ramses was born around 1303 BCE, during the 19th dynasty, into a family that had already secured the throne of Egypt through military prowess rather than ancient bloodlines. His grandfather, Ramses Serthusers, had been a military commander elevated to the throne. His father, Seti I, was a warrior king who spent much of his reign campaigning in Syria and Palestine, securing Egypt's borders and reasserting Egyptian dominance in the Near East. Young Ramses, perhaps 10 or 11 years old, accompanies his father on one of these campaigns. Imagine the scene. A boy, dressed in the finest linen, wearing a smaller version of the royal regalia, standing in a chariot beside the living God who is his father. The army stretches behind them, thousands of soldiers organized into divisions named for gods: the division of Amun, the division of Ra, the division of Ptah, the division of Seth. This is not merely a military campaign, it's a religious procession. Before the army departed from Egypt, elaborate ceremonies were performed. The pharaoh entered the temple of Amun-Ra at Thebes, the most powerful god in the Egyptian pantheon during this period, and emerged with the god's blessing for the campaign. Oracles were consulted, omens were read. Priests accompanied the army, carrying portable shrines containing the images of gods, so that divine presence would march alongside mortal soldiers. Young Ramses watches everything. He learns that warfare for a pharaoh is inseparable from religious duty. The enemies Egypt faces aren't merely political rivals or threats to territorial integrity. They're agents of chaos, threats to Ma'at, the cosmic order that Egypt embodies and that Pharaoh is sworn to maintain. To defeat them is to perform a religious act, to push back the forces of disorder that constantly threaten to overwhelm the civilized world. He also learns something else, something more subtle, but equally important, that being a god is a performance that must be executed flawlessly. His father, Seti I, never appears before the army looking tired, uncertain, or weak. Even after long marches, even when the campaign isn't going well, Seti I emerges from his tent dressed in full regalia, his posture perfect, his expression serene and confident. The soldiers must see a god, not a man. They must believe that divine power flows through their commander, that victory is ordained by the cosmos itself. Ramses absorbs these lessons, and he will apply them throughout his extraordinarily long reign. Fast forward now, about a decade. Ramses is in his early 20s and his father has died. The elaborate 70-day funeral process has been completed. The mummification, the rituals, the procession to the tomb in the Valley of the Kings. Seti I has been transformed from a living god into an eternal one. His body preserved and his spirit, if all has been done correctly, now dwelling in the field of reeds while also residing in his tomb, sustained by offerings. And now, Ramses must himself become divine. The coronation ceremony is extraordinary in its complexity and its meaning. It's not merely a political transition, it's a metaphysical transformation. Ramses the man must become Ramses the god, the living Horus, the son of Ra, the guarantor of Mahat for all Egypt. The ceremony begins at dawn, that liminal moment between night and day, between the mortal and divine realms. Ramses has spent the night in ritual purification, fasting, and being washed repeatedly in water from the sacred lake. His body has been anointed with oils and unguents, each with religious significance: myrrh for immortality, frankincense for divine favor, cedar oil for strength and endurance. He's dressed in the most ancient regalia of kingship: the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, combined into the double crown that symbolizes the unification of the two lands. He wears the false beard of kingship, attached with straps in a way that must be terribly uncomfortable, but which he will never acknowledge. In his hands, he holds the crook and flail, symbols of his role as shepherd and disciplinarian of his people, but also symbols with much older, more complex religious meanings relating to death, resurrection, and Osiris, god of the underworld. The ceremony proceeds through the great temple of Amun at Karnak. High priests lead him through a series of chambers, each transition marking a stage in his transformation. In one chamber, he's presented with the various crowns of Egypt, not just the double crown, but the blue war crown, the Atef crown with its feathers, the Nemes headcloth. Each is placed upon his head briefly, while priests recite prayers and invocations. In another chamber, the most sacred moment occurs. The priests declare that Ramses has been embraced by Amun himself, that the god has acknowledged him as his son, that divine power now flows through Ramses's veins. This isn't metaphorical. Everyone present, including Ramses, believes this is literally true. He is not like a god. He is not representing a god. He is a god, a living conduit of divine power, the intermediary between the heavens and the earth. But here's the exquisite paradox that Ramses must navigate for the next 66 years. He is simultaneously a god and a mortal man. He is divine, yet his body can still be injured, can fall ill, will eventually die. He must maintain absolute confidence in his own divinity, while also attending to the very human business of ruling a vast empire, managing administrators, commanding armies, adjudicating disputes, ensuring the granaries are full and the irrigation systems maintained. And he does this brilliantly. One of Ramses' first major acts as pharaoh is to begin a building program of unprecedented scale. This isn't vanity, though later historians sometimes interpret it that way. For Ramses, building temples is a religious obligation, a way of strengthening Mahat, of providing proper dwelling places for the gods, and, crucially, of demonstrating to both Egyptians and foreigners that Egypt remains powerful, wealthy, and divinely favored. His most famous project is the temple at Abu Simbel, carved directly into a cliff face in Nubia, far to the south of Egypt proper. The facade is dominated by 4 colossal seated statues of Ramses himself, each over 60 feet tall. These aren't mere monuments to ego, they're theological statements. The statues show Ramses wearing different crowns, representing his various divine aspects. They face east, so that the rising sun, Ra himself, illuminates them each morning. And twice a year, on dates that may correspond to Ramses's coronation and birth, Sunlight penetrates deep into the temple's inner sanctuary, illuminating statues of Ra-Horakhti, Amun, Ptah, and Ramses himself. The pharaoh seated among the gods as an equal. The message is clear. Ramses is not merely favored by the gods, he is one of them. But maintaining this divine status requires constant, exhausting religious labor. Consider Ramses's typical day, particularly during his middle years when he's firmly established in power. He wakes before dawn in whatever palace he's currently residing in. He has several throughout Egypt. Immediately, he undergoes purification. Servants bathe him, anoint him with oils, dress him in fresh linen. He cannot simply roll out of bed and stumble to breakfast like a normal person. Every time he appears before others, he must already be the god king. His first official act is often participation in the morning temple ritual. Even though priests handle most of the daily temple services, Pharaoh's presence is required for the most important ceremonies. He processes to the temple, surrounded by attendants carrying fans and standards. When he enters the inner sanctuary, the only place where a god can safely interact with another god, he performs the ritual of opening the shrine. This ceremony involves unsealing the naos, the innermost shrine containing the statue of the god. The statue, typically only about 3 feet tall and made of gold or gilded wood, is believed to house the actual presence of the deity. Ramses greets the god, offers prayers, presents food offerings, burns incense, and anoints the statue with precious oils. Then he redresses the statue in fresh linen and closes the shrine. This ritual must be performed with absolute precision. Any error, any lapse in the proper procedures, could displease the god and bring disaster upon Egypt. The weight of this responsibility, repeated day after day, year after year, is enormous. After the morning temple service, Ramses proceeds to the business of governance. He holds audiences, receives reports from officials, makes judicial decisions, and plans military campaigns. But even these secular activities are infused with religious meaning. When he judges disputes, he does so as the living embodiment of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice. When he plans military campaigns, he consults priests and oracles, seeking divine guidance. In his 5th year as pharaoh, Ramses faces the greatest crisis of his reign, the Battle of Kadesh. The Hittite Empire, centered in Anatolia, has been expanding southward, threatening Egyptian control over Syria. Ramses assembles a massive army and marches north to confront them. He's confident, perhaps overconfident, in his divine protection. The campaign begins with proper religious observances. Ramses makes offerings at the major temples along his route. Oracles are consulted and provide favorable predictions. The army's standards, topped with images of gods, are consecrated before departure. Ramses himself wears amulets and carries talismans believed to provide protection and ensure victory. But at Kadesh, things go terribly wrong. Ramses and the division of Amun, the lead division of his army, advance ahead of the other divisions. They're ambushed by a much larger Hittite force. Suddenly, Ramses finds himself surrounded, his army scattered, facing what appears to be certain defeat and death. This is the moment that defines Ramses's reign, not because of what actually happens militarily. The battle is, at best, a draw, but because of how Ramses chooses to interpret and memorialize it religiously. According to the official account that Ramses has carved on multiple temple walls throughout Egypt, he finds himself alone, abandoned by his soldiers, surrounded by thousands of enemies. In this desperate moment, he calls out to Amun-Ra, "What is this, my father Amun? Has a father forgotten his son? Have I done anything without you? Do I not walk and stop at your bidding? And Amun answers. According to Ramses's account, the god speaks directly to him. Forward. I am with you. I, your father, my hand is with you. I prevail over hundreds of thousands. Ramses is filled with divine strength. He charges into the enemy, scattering them like chaff. His arrows never miss. His spear is unstoppable. Single-handedly, he holds off the Hittite army until his other divisions arrive and the battle becomes winnable. Now, here's what's fascinating. Modern historians examining Hittite records and archaeological evidence conclude that the Battle of Kadesh was, at best, inconclusive. Both sides claimed victory. Neither achieved their strategic objectives. It's possible that Ramses's personal heroics were exaggerated or even invented. But for Ramses and for Egyptian theology, the literal truth of these events doesn't matter. What matters is the religious truth, that Pharaoh called upon his divine father, was answered, and was saved through divine intervention. This story becomes central to Ramses's self-presentation for the rest of his reign. He has it carved on temple walls in multiple locations at Luxor, at Karnak, at Abu Simbel, at the Ramesseum. The story is told in both hieroglyphic text and elaborate relief carvings, showing Ramses larger than life, trampling enemies beneath his chariot wheels, surrounded by divine symbols. Priests recite the account during festivals. It becomes part of Egypt's sacred history. This is Ramses wielding religion as a tool of power. By framing his survival at Kadesh as divine intervention, he accomplishes several things. He explains away a military failure. He reinforces his status as beloved of the gods. He provides evidence of continued divine favor over Egypt, and he creates a narrative that will be repeated and believed for generations. As Ramses ages, and he ages impressively, living into his 90s in a time when few people survived past 50, his religious activities intensify rather than diminish. He celebrates an extraordinary number of Sad festivals. These are Jubilee celebrations, traditionally held after a pharaoh has ruled for 30 years, intended to magically renew the king's power and vitality. Ramses celebrates his first Ised festival right on schedule in his 30th year. But then he continues celebrating them, eventually holding more than a dozen over the course of his reign, far more than any previous pharaoh. Each Esed festival is an elaborate, expensive, multi-day ceremony involving ritual races, symbolic battles, presentations of offerings, and the ritual reaffirmation of the pharaoh's right to rule. For Ramses, these aren't just celebrations. They're magical operations intended to literally extend his life and maintain his divine power. And perhaps they work. After all, he does live an extraordinarily long life for his era. In his later years, Ramses focuses increasingly on temple building and religious endowments. He establishes or expands temples throughout Egypt and Nubia. He ensures that each temple is lavishly supplied with offerings: bread, beer, meat, incense, precious oils. These offerings must be maintained in perpetuity, creating a massive economic drain on the state, but also ensuring that the gods remain properly fed and honored. He also becomes increasingly concerned with his own mortuary cult, the religious apparatus that will maintain his memory and support his continued existence after death. He constructs the Ramesseum, his enormous mortuary temple on the West Bank at Thebes. This isn't merely a tomb. It's a complete religious and economic complex including temples, storage facilities, administrative buildings, and housing for the priests who will maintain his cult. The Ramesseum is designed to function for eternity. Ramses endows it with extensive agricultural lands, whose produce will fund offerings at his temple forever. He establishes a priestly hierarchy to manage the complex. He has prayers and hymns composed that will be recited in his honor, transforming him from a living god into an eternal one. When Ramses finally dies, probably around 1213 BCE, he's over 90 years old. He's outlived not only his contemporaries, but many of his own children. His death is not unexpected, but it's still momentous. The living god has become a dead god, and Egypt must transition to a new pharaoh while ensuring Ramses's successful journey to the afterlife. The mummification process takes the full 70 days, as befits a pharaoh. His internal organs are removed and preserved in canopic jars. His body is desiccated with natron, treated with resins and oils, wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen bandages, each layer accompanied by prayers and amulets. The process is both practical preservation and religious transformation, turning Ramses's mortal remains into a vessel suitable for his eternal spirit. His tomb in the Valley of the Kings is elaborate, its walls covered with texts and images from the Book of the Dead, the Book of Gates, and other funerary texts. These aren't mere decoration, they're functional, providing Ramses with the knowledge and magical protection he'll need to navigate the dangerous journey through the underworld. The funeral procession is extraordinary. His mummy, enclosed in multiple nested coffins and a massive stone sarcophagus, is transported across the Nile to the West Bank, the land of the dead. Thousands of mourners participate, including professional wailers whose job is to express grief loudly and dramatically. Priests burn incense, make offerings, and recite prayers. The entire spectacle is designed to ease Ramses's transition from this world to the next. At the tomb entrance, the most critical ritual occurs: the opening of the mouth ceremony. Using special instruments, a priest ritually touches the mummy's mouth, eyes, ears, and nose, magically restoring these senses so that Ramses can eat, see, hear, and breathe in the afterlife. Without this ceremony, he would be helpless in the world beyond death. Finally, the mummy is placed in the burial chamber, surrounded by an incredible wealth of grave goods, furniture, weapons, jewelry, food, clothing, and magical objects. The tomb is sealed, and Ramses begins his eternal existence, sustained by the offerings brought daily to his mortuary temple. But here's the profound irony. For all his efforts, for all his temple building and monument carving, for all his careful preparation for eternity, Ramses's mummy doesn't rest peacefully in his tomb. Within a few centuries of his death, as Egypt's power wanes and the new kingdom collapses, tomb robbers plunder the Valley of the Kings. Ramses's tomb is violated, his grave goods stolen, his mummy damaged. Priests, trying to protect what remains of Egypt's great pharaohs, eventually move his mummy to a secret cache, where it lies hidden with dozens of other royal mummies until its discovery in the late 19th century. Today, Ramses II's mummy rests in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, behind glass, his face visible to thousands of tourists each year. His features are still recognizable: a hooked nose, prominent jaw, wisps of reddish hair. He looks surprisingly small somehow, this man who built temples that still dominate the landscape, who ruled for longer than most people live, who claimed to be a god. Was he divine? His people believed so absolutely. He believed so, or performed belief so flawlessly, that no distinction remained between the man and the god. For 66 years, he woke each morning and put on divinity like a garment, never dropping the performance, always maintaining the essential fiction, or truth, depending on your perspective, that he was the living embodiment of cosmic order. his life demonstrates something crucial about ancient Egyptian religion. It wasn't merely a set of beliefs or a collection of rituals. It was a complete worldview, a way of organizing reality itself, in which the divine and the human were inextricably entangled, and in which a single individual could be simultaneously a man and a god, mortal and eternal, ruler of an empire and servant of the cosmos. And that, perhaps more than any monument or any battle, is Ramses the Great's true legacy. We'll rest here for a moment, letting the dust of ancient processions settle, before we turn our attention to something even more mysterious: the Egyptian vision of what lies beyond death itself. Let us turn now from the grandeur of pharaohs and the toil of daily life to something more enigmatic, more deeply strange. Let us explore the Egyptian conception of death and what follows, a vision so elaborate, so carefully constructed, and yet so alien to modern thinking, that even after more than a century of archaeological discovery and scholarly analysis, we find ourselves still puzzling over its deeper meanings. The ancient Egyptians didn't simply believe in an afterlife. They believed in multiple afterlives, or perhaps more accurately, they believed that a person's existence after death was fractured into several simultaneous states, each requiring careful maintenance, each vulnerable to its own particular dangers. To understand this, we must first abandon our usual way of thinking about the self as a unified, indivisible entity. We think of ourselves as single beings, one body, one soul, one consciousness. The Egyptians saw things very differently. According to their theology, a person consists of several distinct components, each with its own nature and destiny. The kat, the physical body, which must be preserved through mummification. The ka, a kind of life force or spiritual double, created at birth, which requires regular offerings of food and drink to survive after death. The ba, often translated as soul, but more accurately a person's personality or unique characteristics, depicted in art as a human-headed bird that can move freely between the tomb and the world of the living. The ak, the transformed, glorified spirit that successfully navigates the afterlife and becomes one of the blessed dead. The ren, the person's name, which must be preserved and spoken to maintain their existence. The eb, the heart, believed to be the seat of thought and emotion, which will be weighed in judgment. And perhaps others, the shut or shadow, the sekum or power, which appear in some texts, but whose exact nature remains debated by scholars. Each of these components has different needs and faces, different perils after death. This is why Egyptian funerary practices are so elaborate. They're not merely preserving a body, they're maintaining an entire constellation of spiritual entities, each of which must be properly cared for if the deceased is to achieve a successful afterlife. Let us follow one of these components, the ba, on its journey, for this gives us perhaps the clearest window into the Egyptian imagination of death. Imagine that you have just died. Your last breath has escaped your lungs. Your heartbeat has stilled. The professional mourners, women hired by your family, have already begun their wailing, tearing at their clothes, throwing dust on their heads in ritualized expressions of grief. Your body is taken by the embalmers. If you're wealthy, the process will be elaborate and expensive. If you're poor, it will be simpler, but the essential elements remain the same. The embalmers make an incision in your left side and remove your internal organs, your liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. Your heart, however, remains in your body. This is crucial. The heart is the seat of your consciousness, your moral center, and it will be needed for the judgment that awaits you. Your brain, considered useless, is pulled out through your nose with a hook and discarded. Modern people find this shocking, the organ we consider the seat of consciousness treated as waste. But the Egyptians saw the brain as merely a gland that produces mucus. Your organs are treated with natron, a naturally occurring salt, and placed in canopic jars, each protected by a different deity. Imseti for the liver, Hapi for the lungs, Duamutef for the stomach, Kebesenuef for the intestines. Your body, too, is covered in natron and left to dry for 40 days. During this time, your Ba has emerged. It hovers near your body, confused and frightened. The world of the dead is terrifying, filled with demons, serpents, lakes of fire, and gates guarded by hostile spirits. Your Ba doesn't yet know where to go or what to do. This is why your family has provided you with a Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead, more accurately translated as the Book of Coming Forth by Day, is not a single, standardized text. It's a collection of spells, prayers, and instructions, compiled differently for different individuals based on what they can afford. A wealthy person might have dozens of spells, beautifully illustrated on papyrus and placed in their tomb. A poorer person might have just a few key spells scratched on their coffin or on strips of linen wrapped with the mummy. But certain spells appear in nearly every version because certain challenges await every deceased person. Your Ba, freed from your body but tethered to it, begins to explore this strange new realm. The texts describe this world in vivid, often contradictory ways. Sometimes it's an underground domain, the Duat, through which the sun god Ra travels each night. Sometimes it's a mirror of earthly Egypt, but perfected, the field of reeds, where crops grow higher, where water is always available, where there is no hunger or pain. But to reach these destinations, you must first navigate a series of obstacles. You encounter the first gate. It's guarded by a demon with a serpent's body and a knife in each hand. To pass, you must know the gate's name, the gatekeeper's name, and the correct password. If you don't know these, if your family couldn't afford to include this spell in your funerary texts, you cannot pass. You're stuck here, in this liminal space, unable to proceed to judgment or reward. But let's assume you're fortunate. Your funerary papyrus includes Spell 125, one of the most important and elaborate texts in the Book of the Dead. You know the names. You speak them. Oh, you who strides forward, who comes forth from Heliopolis, I have not committed sin. The gate opens. You proceed to the next one and the next. Each requires its own knowledge, its own passwords. The journey is exhausting, terrifying. You encounter lakes of fire that you must cross. Demons challenge you, testing whether you know the proper responses. You must convince various deities that you have the right to pass, that you lived correctly, that you deserve to continue. And finally, you reach the Hall of Two Truths, the place of judgment. This is the moment that has haunted you throughout your life, the prospect that has influenced every moral decision you've made. The hall is presided over by Osiris, the god of the underworld, the divine being who himself died and was resurrected, who understands death from the inside. Osiris sits on a throne, wrapped in white linen like a mummy, holding the crook and flail of kingship. Around him stand 42 divine assessor gods, each representing a different nome, province of Egypt, each responsible for judging a different category of sin. In the center of the hall stands a scale. On one side of the scale, Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, places your heart, your Ib, the organ that contains the record of all your deeds, thoughts, and intentions. On the other side, he places a feather, the feather of Mahat, representing truth, justice, and cosmic order. Now comes the negative confession, one of the most remarkable texts to survive from ancient Egypt. You must declare before these assembled divine judges all the sins you have not committed. I have not done wrong. I have not robbed. I have not stolen. I have not killed people. I have not stolen food. I have not caused anyone to weep. I have not committed murder. I have not caused anyone suffering. I have not had sexual relations with a boy. I have not defiled myself. I have not added to the weight of the balance. I have not falsified the plummet of the scales. I have not taken milk from the mouths of children. I have not driven cattle from their pasture. The list continues. 42 declarations, corresponding to the 42 assessor gods. Some prohibitions are universal and expected. Don't murder, don't steal, don't lie. Others are specific to Egyptian culture. Don't damage the irrigation systems, don't steal temple offerings, don't kill the sacred animals. And here's what modern scholars find fascinating and troubling. Are you declaring what you actually didn't do? Or is this a magical spell that makes your denials true, regardless of your actual behavior? The texts aren't clear. The emphasis seems to be on knowing the correct words, the correct procedure, more than on the actual moral content of your life. But perhaps both matter. Perhaps the spell only works if you genuinely tried to live correctly. Or perhaps the Egyptians, pragmatic as always, believed that proper ritual could compensate for moral failings, that magic and ethics were both real forces that could balance each other out. As you speak each denial, the scale remains balanced. Your heart, containing the weight of your deeds, hovers opposite the feather. If you've lived well, if your declarations are true, or true enough, or spoken with sufficient magical power, your heart will be light. The scale will balance or tip in your favor. But if you've lived badly, if your heart is heavy with evil deeds and impure thoughts, the scale tips the wrong way. And then you face Amet. Amet, the devourer, crouches beside the scale, waiting. She's a composite creature, one of several in Egyptian mythology that combine the most dangerous animals of Egypt: the head of a crocodile, the body and forelimbs of a lion or leopard, the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. All three of these animals are deadly. All three kill humans regularly in the Egyptian environment, and their combination creates something even more terrifying. If your heart is heavy, Amet devours it. And this isn't merely death. You're already dead. This is obliteration. Your heart destroyed, you cannot proceed to the afterlife. You cease to exist in any meaningful way. Your ka starves, your ba dissolves, your name is forgotten. You face what the Egyptians called the second death, from which there is no return, no resurrection, no hope. The Egyptians feared this more than anything. Not pain, not suffering, but non-existence. Complete erasure from the cosmos. But let's say your heart balances with the feather. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of knowledge and writing, records the result. Horus, the falcon-headed god of kingship, takes your hand and leads you before Osiris. The great god speaks words of acceptance. You are declared Ma-Keru, true of voice or justified. You have passed the test. You may proceed to the field of reeds. And here the Egyptian imagination becomes almost poignant in its earthiness. The afterlife they envisioned wasn't a realm of pure spirit, of abstract bliss, of transcendent peace. It was Egypt, just better Egypt. In the field of reeds you have a plot of land. You farm it, just as you farmed in life, but the harvests are always abundant. Wheat grows as tall as a man. Water is always available. The sun is never too hot, the work never too exhausting. You eat bread and drink beer. You enjoy the company of your family and friends who have also passed the judgment. But here's an interesting detail. You still have to work. The afterlife includes labor. This is why the Shabti figures are so important. These small statuettes placed in tombs by the hundreds for wealthy individuals are magical servants. When the gods of the underworld call upon you to perform labor, to dig canals, to reap fields, to perform the eternal agricultural work that sustains even the cosmos, your Shabti figures magically animate and do the work for you. The spell inscribed on most Shabti figures is quite explicit. O Shabti, if I am called upon to do any work that is to be done in the realm of the dead, let all that stands in the way be removed from you, to cultivate the fields, to irrigate the riverbanks, to transport sand from east to west. Here I am, you shall say. So even in paradise, the Egyptians couldn't quite escape the agricultural labor that defined their earthly existence. They simply outsourced it to magical servants. But the mysteries deepen when we examine the actual funerary texts more closely, because they contain contradictions, puzzles, and passages that scholars still struggle to interpret. Consider the so-called cannibal hymn, a text from the Old Kingdom that appears in the pyramid texts, the oldest religious texts in Egypt carved into the walls of pyramids. The sky is overcast, the stars are dim, the earth quakes, the bones of the earth gods tremble, for they have seen the king appearing as a god. The king is a great power who has power over the powers. The king feeds on the lungs of the wise ones. He is satisfied with living on hearts and their magic. The king's lifetime is eternity. His limit is everlasting. The text goes on to describe the deceased pharaoh literally consuming the gods, eating their power, absorbing their qualities. It's violent, disturbing, completely at odds with the gentle agricultural afterlife described in later texts. What does it mean? Is it metaphorical? Is it describing a different kind of afterlife available only to pharaohs? Is it a survival from an even earlier, more primitive religious system? Scholars debate these questions, and no consensus has emerged. Or consider the Amduat, the book of what is in the underworld, a text that describes Ra's nightly journey through the Duat. According to this text, the sun god enters the underworld each night through the western horizon and must travel through 12 hours, 12 regions, before emerging at dawn in the east. Each hour is filled with strange beings, gods, demons, spirits of the dead, and things that defy classification. In the 7th hour, Ra encounters Apophis, the great serpent of chaos who tries to swallow him and prevent sunrise. Only through the combined efforts of other gods and through magical spells can Apophis be defeated, temporarily. Tomorrow night, the battle will repeat. And here's the mysterious part. According to some texts, the blessed dead actually help in this battle. They're not merely passive inhabitants of paradise. They're active participants in maintaining cosmic order, fighting alongside Ra against the forces of chaos. So which is true? Is the afterlife a peaceful eternity of farming in perfect conditions? Or is it an ongoing cosmic struggle requiring constant vigilance and effort? The texts suggest both are somehow true simultaneously. There are other mysteries embedded in Egyptian funerary beliefs. Why did mummification practices change so dramatically over Egypt's long history? Early mummies are often better preserved accidentally by desert conditions than by intentional embalming. Middle Kingdom mummies show increasingly sophisticated embalming techniques. New Kingdom mummies represent the peak of the art. But then, in later periods, the techniques decline again, with more emphasis on elaborate wrappings and less on actual preservation. Did beliefs about the afterlife change? Did economics play a role? We can only speculate. What was the relationship between the tomb, the mummy, and the deceased's continued existence? The Ba needed to return to the body regularly. The Ka needed food offerings at the tomb. But the blessed dead were also supposed to be in the field of reeds. How did these multiple locations work simultaneously? The texts simply assert that all are true, without explaining the logistics. Why are some texts prescriptive, telling the deceased what to do, while others are descriptive, describing what happens to the deceased? Is the deceased an active agent navigating challenges, or a passive subject being processed through a system? Again, the texts suggest both. What did ordinary Egyptians actually believe? All our texts come from tombs of the elite or from temple walls. We have some insight into royal and priestly theology, but the beliefs of farmers, craftsmen, laborers, the vast majority of the population, remain largely opaque. Did they share these elaborate visions of the afterlife? Or did they have simpler folk beliefs that left no written record? Modern scholars have found evidence suggesting considerable diversity in belief even within literate elite circles. Some texts emphasize the judgment and moral requirements for successful afterlife. Others emphasize magical knowledge and correct ritual. Some present death as transformation and glorification. Others present it as danger and trial. Perhaps the most honest answer is that the Egyptians themselves didn't have a single, unified, completely consistent theology of the afterlife. Perhaps their beliefs evolved over 3,000 years of continuous civilization. Perhaps different regions, different periods, different social classes had genuinely different understandings of death and what follows. Or perhaps, and this is the interpretation some scholars favor, the contradictions weren't seen as problematic. Perhaps Egyptian religious thought was comfortable holding multiple truths simultaneously, understanding that reality, especially the reality of death and afterlife, was too complex to be captured in any single narrative or theological system. What we can say with certainty is that the Egyptians devoted extraordinary resources, mental, physical, and economic, to preparing for death. They believed, with absolute conviction, that death was not an ending, but a transition, that consciousness continued in some form, that the journey beyond this life was real and required careful preparation. And they believed that how you lived mattered. The judgment scene, the weighing of the heart, appears again and again in funerary texts because it represented something crucial. The idea that existence isn't arbitrary, that moral choices have consequences, that truth and justice, Ma'at, are woven into the fabric of reality itself. Whether these beliefs were objectively true is, of course, unknowable, but they were psychologically true for millions of people across thousands of years. They provided comfort in the face of death, structure for ethical living, and the reassurance that existence had meaning beyond the brief flicker of an individual life. The tombs stand empty now, most of them, their treasures long since plundered, their mummies removed to museums or destroyed by time and neglect. The priests who maintain the offering cults have been dead for millennia. The field of reeds, if it ever existed, is inaccessible to archaeological investigation. But the texts remain, carved in stone, inked on papyrus, wrapped around ancient bodies. And they speak in that strange, formal, repetitive language of religious conviction, of a people who looked at death and refused to accept that it was simply the end, who insisted, against all evidence, that something continues, who built an entire civilization around the audacious hope that consciousness, personality, identity, the things that make us who we are, might somehow persist beyond the dissolution of flesh. Whether they were right remains the ultimate mystery. Let us leave these ancient dead to their rest, these theological puzzles to the scholars who study them, and turn our attention now to those who served as intermediaries between the world of the living and the realm of the gods, the priests of ancient Egypt. We return now from the realm of shadows and speculation to something more tangible, though no less remarkable, the daily operations of Egypt's great temples and the lives of those who inhabited them, not as visitors or supplicants, but as permanent residents, as mediators between humanity and divinity, as the men who literally handled the gods. The Egyptian priesthood was not quite what modern people imagine when they hear the word priest. They weren't primarily spiritual counselors or moral teachers. They didn't deliver sermons or tend to the spiritual needs of congregations. Their function was more specific, more practical, and in some ways more strange. They were the servants of the gods, responsible for maintaining the physical well-being of divine beings who resided in statues within temple sanctuaries. Let us enter one of these temples, not one of the massive, famous structures like Karnak, but a mid-sized provincial temple dedicated to Sobek, the crocodile god, located in the Fayum region during the New Kingdom period. This temple is substantial. It employs perhaps 200 people in various capacities, but it's not so vast that we cannot comprehend its operations. The temple complex covers several acres. At its heart is the sanctuary itself, a stone building with massive walls, windowless except for narrow clerestory openings near the roof that admit thin shafts of light. The building progresses from open to enclosed. First, an open courtyard where common people can gather during festivals, then a hypostyle hall with enormous columns, then progressively smaller and darker chambers, until finally you reach the innermost sanctuary, a small, dark room containing the naos, the shrine housing the statue of Sobek. Surrounding the central temple are extensive auxiliary buildings, workshops where craftsmen produce offerings and temple equipment, granaries storing the agricultural produce from the temple's lands, administrative offices where scribes maintain records, housing for the priests and their families, kitchens, breweries, bakeries, and even sacred pools where both priests and offerings are purified. The temple is, in effect, a small city dedicated to a single purpose: maintaining the presence and favor of Sobek. At the top of this hierarchy stands the high priest of Sobek. Let us call him Amenemope, a man in his 50s who inherited this position from his father, who inherited it from his father before him. The high priesthood of major temples is often hereditary, passed from father to son, creating priestly dynasties that maintain control over vast wealth and considerable political power for generations. Amenemope's day begins, as does everyone's in Egypt, before dawn. But unlike a farmer or craftsman, his morning routine is extraordinarily elaborate and hedged with restrictions. He has spent the night within the temple complex, in the priest's quarters. He cannot return to his home in the town each night, cannot sleep beside his wife, cannot live a normal, domestic life. The priesthood requires periodic separation from the outside world, particularly before performing the most sacred duties. He wakes and immediately proceeds to the sacred lake, a rectangular pool fed by groundwater, located within the temple precinct. The water is cool, slightly murky, but religiously pure. He descends into it completely, submerging himself 4 times, once facing each cardinal direction. This isn't merely bathing, it's ritual purification, washing away any spiritual contamination he might have accumulated during sleep. Emerging from the pool, he's attended by junior priests who help him dry and then dress in fresh linen. The garments are brilliant white, linen bleached and cleaned with obsessive care, because any stain, any imperfection, would make him unfit to approach the god. He wears no wool, no leather, nothing derived from dead animals. His sandals, if he wears any, are made from papyrus. His body hair has been completely removed. Every 4 days, he and all the serving priests shave their entire bodies, heads, faces, arms, legs, even eyebrows, using bronze razors and pumice stones. This practice strikes us as extreme, but for the Egyptians, body hair is associated with impurity, with the animal nature of humans. To approach the gods, one must become as smooth and clean as a statue, as free from biological messiness as possible. He has not eaten anything since sunset yesterday, and he will not eat until his morning duties are complete. His body must be empty, pure, ready to serve as a vessel through which divine service can be performed. Around him, the temple is awakening. Other priests are emerging from their quarters, junior priests and wab priests, the lowest-ranking priests whose primary duties involve cleaning and maintenance, are already moving through the complex, lighting lamps, arranging offerings, preparing for the day's first and most important ritual, the opening of the shrine. As the sky begins to lighten, Amenemope processes toward the sanctuary. He's accompanied by other high-ranking priests, each carrying specific ritual implements, a censer burning incense, an ewer of sacred water, jars of precious oils, fresh linen for clothing the god. They enter the temple, passing through the public courtyard, empty at this early hour, and into the hypostyle hall. The massive columns rise into darkness above them. Their footsteps echo on the stone floor. The air is thick with incense smoke from yesterday's rituals, never quite dissipating in these windowless spaces. They continue deeper into the temple, passing through doorways that become progressively smaller, ceilings that become progressively lower, as if the architecture itself is constraining them, reminding them that they're moving from the human world toward the divine. Finally, they reach the sanctuary door. It's sealed with a clay seal stamped with official marks, the same seal that was placed here yesterday evening when the shrine was closed. Amenemope examines the seal carefully. It's unbroken, which is good. No one has entered during the night. No malevolent spirits have disturbed the god's rest. He breaks the seal and opens the door. The sanctuary is almost completely dark. The statue of Sobek, perhaps 3 feet tall, made of wood covered with gold leaf, with eyes of rock crystal and lapis lazuli, sits within its shrine, a small structure like a box with doors. Before it lie yesterday's offerings, now slightly dried and stale. What happens next is remarkable in its intimacy and its strangeness. Amenemope approaches the shrine and begins speaking to Sobek. Not prayers exactly, but greetings, the same sort of gentle words one might use waking a sleeping person. Awake in peace. May you awake in peace. May your awakening be peaceful. The awakening of Sobek in peace. Great God who resides in this place, may you awake in peace. He opens the shrine's doors. Inside, the statue sits in darkness. According to theology, the statue doesn't merely represent Sobek. It is Sobek. Or, rather, It houses the actual presence of the god who was chosen to manifest in this particular form, in this particular place. Amenemope removes yesterday's offerings. The bread is dried out, the beer has gone flat, the flowers have wilted. These will be taken away and either distributed to the temple staff as rations or sold in the temple's markets. Nothing is wasted. Offerings to the gods sustain the entire temple economy. Now comes the most sacred moment. Amenemope reaches into the shrine and carefully removes the statue. He places it on a low stand before the shrine. The statue is surprisingly heavy. The wood core is solid, the gold covering substantial. He begins the process of caring for the god's body. First, he washes the statue with sacred water from the temple's well, water that has never been exposed to sunlight. He uses soft linen cloths, wiping away any dust, any residue from yesterday's anointing. He speaks constantly as he works, explaining what he's doing, apologizing for any inadvertent disrespect, praising the god's power and beauty. Then comes the anointing. He has 5 different oils, each with specific properties and sacred associations: cedar oil, Libya oil, best cedar oil, best Libya oil, and Syrian balsam oil. He applies each in turn, working methodically, anointing the statue's head, torso, arms. The scent is overwhelming, rich, resinous, almost drugging in the enclosed space. Next, he applies cosmetics. Yes, the god wears makeup. A statue of a male deity receives applications of green malachite around the eyes and red ochre on the cheeks. Female deities receive even more elaborate cosmetic treatment. This isn't vanity, it's protection. The eye makeup, particularly, is believed to have magical protective properties, shielding the god's vision from harmful influences. Now he must dress the god. The statue is currently naked, or wearing yesterday's clothing which must be replaced. Amenemope has fresh linen garments, tiny, meticulously sewn clothes sized to fit the statue. He carefully dresses the god, wrapping it in the linen, tying the garments with thin cords. Then comes jewelry. Depending on the temple's wealth, this might include gold collars, bracelets, rings, amulets. Some statues wear fortunes in precious metals and gems. These are not merely decorative. Each piece has protective and empowering properties. Finally, he presents the morning offerings: fresh bread still warm from the temple bakery, beer newly brewed, roasted meat, vegetables, fruits, flowers. He arranges these before the statue, creating an elaborate display. As he places each item, he recites the offering formula: a royal offering of bread and beer, oxen and fowl, alabaster and linen, all things good and pure on which the god lives, for the Ka of Sobek, the lord of this place. The entire process has taken perhaps 2 hours. The sun is now fully risen. Sobek has been awakened, cleansed, anointed, dressed, adorned, and fed. The god is satisfied, and the cosmic order has been maintained. Amenemope carefully returns the statue to its shrine and closes the doors. He backs out of the sanctuary, sweeping the floor with a broom as he retreats, erasing his footprints, removing any trace of human presence. The sanctuary door is closed and sealed with a new clay seal. The morning ritual is complete, but Amenemope's day is far from over. He's the high priest, the administrator of a complex religious and economic institution. He now transitions from purely ritual duties to administrative ones. He proceeds to his office, a chamber in one of the auxiliary buildings, where scribes are already waiting with reports. The temple owns extensive agricultural lands, gifts from pharaohs and wealthy individuals accumulated over generations. These lands must be managed, their produce collected, stored, and distributed. Scribes present accounts. How much grain was harvested? How much has been paid to workers? How much is available for offerings? How much surplus can be sold in the markets? The numbers are staggering. A major temple might receive thousands of loaves of bread daily, hundreds of jars of beer, countless cuts of meat, bushels of vegetables. Much of this is technically offered to the gods, placed briefly before their statues, then redistributed. The gods, of course, don't actually consume the food. They consume its spiritual essence, leaving the physical matter available for human use. This system creates a massive economic engine. The temple is one of the largest employers in the region, providing work for farmers, craftsmen, bakers, brewers, butchers, florists, perfume makers, and countless others. It's also a major landowner, controlling perhaps a fifth of all agricultural land in the province. Amenemopu must make decisions about all of this: which fields to plant with what crops, how to handle a dispute between tenant farmers, whether to invest in repairing an irrigation canal, how to allocate resources between daily offerings and the upcoming festival. He also handles personnel matters. The temple employs different classes of priests who serve in rotating shifts. The Hemnetcher priests, servants of God, serve 1 month in every 4, living in the temple during their service period, then returning to their normal lives for 3 months. During their month of service, they must observe strict purity rules: no sexual contact, no eating of certain foods, frequent purification baths, body hair removal. Managing this rotation, ensuring adequate staffing, handling conflicts between priests, maintaining discipline, all of this falls to Amenemopi. There are also the temple craftsmen to oversee. In the workshops, specialists produce the items needed for temple rituals: linen weavers making the pristine white garments for priests and gods, goldsmiths creating jewelry and ritual implements, perfume makers blending the precious oils used in anointing, florists cultivating and arranging the flowers required for offerings. And then there are the sacred crocodiles. This being a temple of Sobek, the complex includes pools housing live crocodiles, believed to be living manifestations of the god. These creatures must be fed, their pools cleaned, their health monitored. They wear gold jewelry, actual gold bands around their legs and tails, and receive offerings of their own. When one dies, it's mummified and buried with honor. When a new one is needed, priests undertake dangerous expeditions to capture a suitable specimen from the Nile. Amenemopi inspects the crocodile pools regularly, observing the sacred animals from a safe distance. They're magnificent and terrifying, 10, 12, 15 feet long, their movements both graceful and menacing. Junior priests feed them cuts of meat, tossing the food from the edge of the pool, careful never to get too close. Despite their sacred status, these are still wild predators fully capable of killing a human. By midday, Amenemopi must oversee the noon ritual, similar to the morning's awakening, but simpler, primarily involving presenting fresh offerings and burning incense. He doesn't perform this himself. He delegates it to other high-ranking priests while he continues with administrative work. The afternoon brings petitioners. As high priest, Amenemopi serves a limited judicial function, settling disputes related to the temple and its lands. He also meets with representatives from other temples, with government officials collecting taxes, with wealthy individuals seeking to make donations in exchange for prayers or memorial services. One petitioner is particularly interesting: a wealthy merchant who has survived a dangerous journey and wishes to thank Sobek with a generous offering. The merchant has brought a significant donation: silver, incense, fine linen, and requests that a stela be erected in the temple courtyard commemorating his safe return. This is routine. The temple courtyards are filled with such stelae, stone monuments recording donations, answered prayers, and narrow escapes from crocodile attacks. Each represents a transaction. The deity provided protection or favor. The human responds with gifts and public acknowledgement. Amenemope accepts the donation graciously, assures the merchant that prayers will be said, and instructs scribes to arrange for the stela's creation. The merchant leaves satisfied, and the temple's treasury is enriched. Everyone benefits. The merchant gains divine favor and public recognition. The temple receives resources, and the god's reputation for effectiveness is enhanced. As evening approaches, the final major ritual of the day must be performed, the closing of the shrine. This is similar to the morning ritual, but in reverse. The god must be prepared for the night, offered an evening meal, adorned with protective amulets against the dangers of darkness, and sealed safely within the sanctuary. Amenemope performs this ritual personally, as he did the morning opening. He enters the sanctuary, greets the god, presents evening offerings, ensures that the statue is properly positioned and protected, then closes and seals the shrine doors. He backs out of the sanctuary, sweeping away his footprints, leaving the god in darkness and silence until tomorrow's awakening. Finally, as night settles over the temple complex, Amenemope can eat. He proceeds to the dining hall where the higher-ranking priests take their evening meal. The food is, of course, composed largely of offerings that were previously presented to the gods. There's an elaborate system determining who receives what. The finest cuts of meat go to the highest-ranking priests, lesser cuts to junior priests, the plainest food to the wab priests and temple workers. The meal is eaten in relative silence. Even now, even in this moment of rest, the priests maintain a certain formality, a consciousness of their sacred status. They eat with their right hands only. The left hand is considered impure. They consume no pork, no certain species of fish deemed unclean. Some avoid garlic and onions, believing these foods create impurity. After the meal, Amenemope has a few hours of freedom before sleep. He might review temple accounts, read from religious texts, confer with other senior priests about upcoming festivals. The temple complex never truly sleeps. There are always junior priests on duty, maintaining lamps, watching for fire or intrusion, ensuring that nothing disturbs the gods during the night hours. This has been Amenemope's life for decades, and it will continue until he's too old to fulfill the duties, at which point his eldest son, currently training as a junior priest, will succeed him. The son has been learning the rituals since childhood, memorizing the prayers and procedures, understanding the temple's complex operations, preparing to inherit not just a position but a sacred responsibility. The high priesthood provides Amenemope with considerable privilege. He lives well, eating high-quality food, wearing fine linen, residing in a substantial house within the temple complex. His family has status, recognition, security. The position brings wealth, not from a salary exactly, but from his share of the temple's offerings and revenues, from gifts and donations, from the use of temple resources. But it also demands constant attention, constant performance, constant awareness of his role as intermediary between the human and divine realms. He cannot simply stop being a priest when the day's rituals are complete. His entire identity is bound up with the temple, with Sobek, with the maintenance of cosmic order. Does he believe? Does Amenemope truly think that the statue houses divine presence? that the god actually consumes the essence of offerings, that his careful performance of rituals matters cosmically. This question is perhaps unanswerable, and maybe even beside the point. He was raised in this system, trained in these practices, taught these beliefs from earliest childhood. His entire understanding of reality, his entire worldview, is structured around these religious assumptions. To ask if he believes might be like asking a modern person if they believe in cause and effect. It's so fundamental to their understanding of how the world works that belief doesn't quite capture it. What we can say is that he performs his duties with meticulous care, that he takes pride in maintaining the traditions handed down through generations, that he finds meaning and purpose in his role as servant of the god. And beyond Amenemope, beyond this one temple, there are hundreds of similar complexes throughout Egypt, each dedicated to different deities, each employing hundreds or thousands of people, each performing similar rituals day after day, year after year, generation after generation. The cumulative effect is staggering. At any given moment during ancient Egypt's long history, thousands of priests are washing statues, presenting offerings, burning incense, reciting prayers, maintaining the elaborate infrastructure of divine service. The temples are economic powerhouses, controlling vast wealth and land. They're also centers of learning, temple libraries, house collections of texts on religion, medicine, mathematics, astronomy. Priests are often the most educated people in their communities, literate in both normal hieroglyphic writing and the specialized hieratic and demotic scripts. They're also deeply conservative institutions. The rituals Amenemope performs in the New Kingdom are essentially unchanged from those performed 1,000 years earlier. When changes do occur, they're carefully justified as returns to ancient tradition, as rediscoveries of old wisdom rather than innovations. This conservatism helps explain Egyptian civilization's remarkable continuity. While empires rise and fall around them, while foreign peoples invade and rule Egypt, the temples remain, the rituals continue, the gods are fed and clothed and honored. The system is so deeply embedded, so thoroughly institutionalized, that it persists even when political authority fractures. Eventually, of course, it ends. When Christianity becomes the dominant religion in late antiquity, the temples are closed, the priests dispersed, the rituals discontinued. The last hieroglyphic inscription, a prayer to the gods, is carved at Philae Temple in 394 CE. After that, silence. 3,000 years of continuous tradition ceases within a few generations. But for those 3,000 years, the temples stood, the priests served, and the gods, whether they existed independently or only in the collective imagination of millions of believers, were meticulously, lovingly, endlessly maintained. And so we've journeyed through 4 different facets of ancient Egyptian religious life: the daily struggles of common believers, the carefully constructed divinity of Pharaoh Ramses II, the mysterious and elaborate vision of the afterlife, and the priestly servants who maintained the gods themselves. What emerges is a picture of a civilization thoroughly saturated with religious consciousness, where sacred and secular were not separate categories but were woven together into a single fabric. For the Egyptians, religion wasn't something practiced on special occasions or confined to special buildings. It was the structure of reality itself, the explanation for why crops grew or failed, why the Nile flooded or didn't, why some people prospered while others suffered. They developed answers to fundamental human questions. What happens after death? How should we live? What gives existence meaning? and they lived by those answers with remarkable consistency across an extraordinary span of time. Whether their answers were correct is, as we've seen, ultimately unknowable. The gods are silent now, if they ever spoke. The afterlife remains as mysterious to us as it was to them. The cosmic order they believed they maintained either persists without their help or never required human intervention in the first place. But perhaps what matters most is not whether their beliefs were objectively true, but what those beliefs enabled. A civilization that lasted 3,000 years, that created art and architecture of enduring power, that developed sophisticated systems of ethics and meaning, that gave millions of people across countless generations a framework for understanding their lives and facing their deaths. And now, as you settle more deeply into rest, as these ancient voices fade back into silence, you can reflect on the strange comfort that even the most foreign beliefs can offer, the assurance that humans have always sought meaning, have always wrestled with mortality, have always tried to make sense of existence. The Egyptians are dust now, their cities buried, their temples ruined, their gods forgotten by all but scholars and dreamers. But they lived, they believed, they hoped, and in that, they're not so different from us after all. Rest well, knowing that these questions, the eternal human questions about life and death and meaning, have always been with us and always will be. Thank you for joining me on this journey through ancient Egypt. If you enjoyed this exploration, please subscribe for more restful historical journeys. Leave a comment about what period you'd like to visit next, and like this video if you found it helpful for sleep or learning. Until next time, may you rest peacefully, and may your dreams, if you have them, be as enduring as the pyramids and as gentle as Nile breezes through papyrus reeds.